One of the best parts about being a photographer and videographer is exploring new places and crafting a story around that experience based on my perspective and what I'm able to capture. So when I was given the chance to dive in South Africa, the answer was simple. This was going to be a chance to dive in new conditions, film new subjects, and most importantly, be witness to the South African Sardine run. It was a story that I couldn't pass up on. So here's what went down on Ikelite's latest expedition to South Africa. So to get to South Africa from where I am in the States, it's a bit of a hike. I took 3 planes and totaled a little over 30 hours of travel time. And when I turned on my phone, I saw the worst notification that a photographer can see. My camera gear was never on the plane. But you don't make a trip like this without a plan B, so thankfully I had a full DLM system in my carry-on, minus the handles. The next day was an off day, so I had time to dive in the Two Oceans Aquarium, and I just jumped in and palmed the housing. Now I definitely prefer to dive with handles on my system, it's a lot easier, but the DLM system was small enough to palm and it worked out fine. Now it's not the most thrilling dive, and I definitely didn't expect my first time in the water to be in an aquarium tank, but it was kind of interesting since this tank was filled with animals that were being rehabbed for various problems that they had. So it was fun to try and figure out what was wrong with each of them as they swam by, some being a lot more obvious than others. Then when I got out of the water, I checked my phone, and to my surprise, my camera gear had made it from London to Cape Town the very next day, so it was back to my room to assemble the gear for the rest of the week. My main camera for filming and photographing underwater was the Sony A1. For lenses, I brought the Sony 12-24 for super wide angle and the Sony 16-35 2.8 for everything else. The first dive day started out with a little bit of rain, but after traveling halfway across the world and waiting a whole day to get on the water, it was hard to keep spirits down, so we were all stoked to just cruise up the coast in search of our first spot. What's cool about Jacques' trip is that you really just boat out, see something cool, and decide to dive. We do have some spots in mind, but it's really up to the group on what we see and what we want to do. So the first thing that caught our eye was a group of seals, and they were conveniently next to a kelp forest. The plan was to explore the kelp freediving for a little bit and then hop on scuba and explore some of the corals underneath the seals in hopes that they'd come down and check us out. The kelp in Cape Town is impressive, and that might be a little bit of an understatement. There are these wide sunlit paths, and then there are these dark, narrow corridors that you can explore, and it's really easy to see why this is home to so much life. Like I mentioned, I was freediving here, but I also got to explore it on scuba. And a lot of people choose to freedive in the kelp for a little bit more flexibility, but I actually preferred it on scuba since it allowed me to slow down a little bit and get some of the shots that I had in mind. After exploring the kelp for a little bit, we hopped on scuba and checked out the rock underneath the seals. This was the first seal pup that I got to see, and after a few moments of him checking me out to see if I was cool or not, he came out to play. But once he realized that I couldn't keep up, he went off. So we explored around the reef a little bit more before calling it, heading back to the boat, and boating back to shore. So that night was spent kind of like every night, just offloading footage, grabbing some food, making sure gear was all ready, because the next day we were heading past Cape Point and out into the deep to look for sharks. So it took a few hours to boat out to where it was deep enough to look for the sharks, and we ended up just kind of staring out into the blue for really any sign of life. And as time went on, we started to lose hope for the sharks, and spent most of our time photographing birds that were attracted to our sardines. But eventually we saw something. Barely through the water, you could see this tiny juvenile blue shark. And when you're out there for hours and hours just hoping to see something, and you finally do, you just get in the water. We hopped in the water, and like I said, this thing was tiny. But I was able to track him as he did circles around the boat, and I had one small encounter with him that I'm really happy with. And then he just disappeared back into the blue. After that, we weren't really hopeful that we were going to see any more sharks, so we packed it up and headed back to shore. Thankfully, we had just enough time to hit another sunny kelp forest with incredible visibility. We suited up, jumped in, and this is where I got into the thick of it. I wanted to find more light in the shallows, so I diverted from the wider paths in favor of the shallows, where all of these cool sun rays were breaking through the kelp. Now it gets thick here fast, and the ocean's pushing me in, pulling me out, and I had to time it perfectly to shoot through narrow openings to find my way through. My camera quickly became an afterthought as I pulled myself through the kelp, eventually getting spit out into an opening that was big enough to rest. Then the group spent the rest of our air on a patch surrounded by Shysharks and a short-tailed stingray. So while the kelp offers the opportunity to see really anything, there's so much life that lives there, I couldn't stop thinking about the seals. So I had that one shot with the seal pup and a few other shots while freediving that I really wasn't happy with. So when asked what to do next, we decided to go back to the seals. When we jumped in, immediately 2 seals came down to check us out. They hung around for like 10 to 15 minutes, just spinning and checking us out. And it was enough time to get some shots that I was really happy with. This was also the dive that I was shooting the A7C2 in the smaller Ikelite 200 DLM housing, and was the defining moment when I realized that this thing could actually hold up. Again, it was just such an amazing dive, and those seals led me all around this dive site where I got to see so many beautiful cold water corals and even a pajama shark. But after the dive, we headed back into shore because we had one more animal to check out. Alright, so these are African penguins, and they're the only penguin species in Africa. They showed up in the early 80s, and they've just been chilling on Boulders Beach ever since. Today, they're a protected species and a major tourist attraction in Cape Town. They were a little shy of my camera in the water, but thankfully I was there during peak breeding season and got to see tons of tiny chicks in the bushes. A huge shout out to Oceans Around Us for operating this trip, and if you're ready to take on South Africa and experience all of this for yourself, you can learn more about it in the link in the description.